reimagined in the wake of the systemic racism that afflicts police departments, according to the likes of Mayor Fry and Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis, according to the the uh, the independent nation of Chaz in Seattle, according to the Democrat political hierarchy in this country more generally.
Well, and here in Chicago, the FOP president warned Chicago police about making arrests.
I almost would caution any member to do not pursue anybody. You're basically risking your job, your livelihood, and your freedom.
And when does it become cool to hate cops now? That's like the in thing with the kiddies.
Well, let's address what FOP President Ken Azara said first. So now what are police to do? So they shouldn't pursue anybody, and then somebody's going to catch a police officer not pursuing a suspect, and that suspect doing something to hurt someone else, and then the police officer is going to be blamed for not pursuing the suspect. Why didn't you do your job? So I shouldn't pursue, I should pursue.
What are the rules of engagement?
And there are going to be complicated events, as an example, of course, the Rayshard Brooks shooting in Atlanta on Friday night. But we know from the research in this area, this is not a unknown matter. And by the way, the research includes from Roland Fryer, Harvard economist, a black gentleman, that you put police on their heels, you put them in the fetal position, as it was once described under Rahm Emanuel in this city, and you unleash violence. And you unleash violence where? Disproportionately in the neighborhoods that are already suffering under the weight and the threat of violence by the few against the many. For more professional perspective on this, we haven't talked to him in a while, so happy to have him back. Former Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke, author of Cop Under Fire, singular, Cop Under Fire, moving beyond hashtags of race, crime, and politics for a better America. Sheriff Clarke, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, it's always my pleasure, and hello to Chicago.
Yeah, and so, just give us your top-line commentary on what you've seen the last 2 weeks, and both the civil unrest and with these police-involved shootings or killings that have led to the unrest.
Yeah, I believe, having studied this anarchist movement going back to the 60s and even before that, in socialist takeovers over in Europe, that there's a sinister plot here that's being unfolded, and these police incidents are being used as a rally point to foment hate and anger in disparate groups, and then unleashing them on the American people. Now, one of the things that has to happen for that to be successful, we saw it during the 60s with a different group, the Students for Democratic Society. One of the things that has to happen is they have to have the police on their heels, as you mentioned. They have to have the police out of the way. The police are the only thing that stands between the rule of law and order in a civil society. And so that's why they attack the police. It has nothing to do with systemic racism in the police department. That does not exist, by the way. It has nothing to do with racism. It has nothing to do with white privilege or white superiority. One of the other tactics they like to use is they create slogans that people can rally around and then march down the street shouting. They don't make any sense. You couldn't put a coherent thought together if you ask them what the problem was. And so this is the whole chaotic situation. And then when you have poor leadership, you throw that in there, you've got poor police leadership, you have poor political leadership, which we haven't had in the past. And that's why we've always been able to neutralize these things when they've happened. But now you have the political class jumping on board. You have the political class hating on the police. You have the political class going along with these inane suggestions like defunding and abolishing the police. And you throw all this together and you have the ingredients for a country that's on fire. I agree with the FOP, the Chicago FOP's head. It's not worth it anymore. is just not worth it for these law enforcement officers. They're on the front line. They're in harm's way. They don't have the resources. They don't have the political support. It's not worth going to jail over. They're firing cops summarily right on the spot when they're involved in any type of use of force. Look at Buffalo, where they just pushed the guy back. That's all they did. And the two officers not only were fired immediately, they were charged. So I agree with him. It is time for the police to push back. And one of the most effective ways to push back in a situation like this is let these communities see what life would be like without them.
Yeah. Well, 14 Minneapolis police officers have resigned, 19 in Atlanta because nobody has their back. So you think we should just give up and just say, please sit this one out for a week and see how the residents like it?
Well, I don't think that we should sit it out, but what I think should happen is in some of these areas where their suggestion is crap, let it happen. In other words, Minneapolis wants to abolish the police. Let's let the Democrats, that's who these cities are led, by the way, let's let them conduct another social engineering experiment with public safety. And we'll use that as a case study to see how it works, because it's going to blow up in their faces. The last time we let these soft-on-crime liberals tinker with public safety, we did it with the schools, where they removed school discipline as a means with which to control students. And we ended up with 17 shot, 17 dead at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, because nobody would deal with Nicholas Cruz, who needed to be taken out of society. What I mean by that is put in an alternative school, put in jail, whatever. They would look the other way on criminal acts. They marginalize, they normalize criminal behavior. Do you find it interesting that all of these individuals, let me say 99%. 99% of these individuals that come in contact with the police have a criminal history, for heaven's sakes, and usually are involved in criminal activity at the time of their demise, and usually are co-contributors in their demise. So instead of doing what we need to do, we work on the wrong things. There is no way we can reform police anymore. We've been reforming the police for the last half century. Anything that's being suggested today is tinkering around the edges, not using rubber bullets, no more tear gas. That's tinkering around the edges. What needs to happen is the ghetto needs to be reformed. All of the urban pathologies that exist in the American ghetto are precursors to crime. You have ineffective parenting, no parenting in some cases. You have fatherless homes. You have school failure. You have questionable lifestyle choices by young people, like joining gangs, involved in crime, and drug and alcohol abuse. Those are just a few of the urban pathologies that lead to a need for more police. When you have more police, they're going to have to be aggressive to protect the overwhelming majority of law-abiding people in these ghettos. That human interaction could lead to problems. Most of these guys, that's why I went back to 99%, most of them were resisting arrest. They're involved in some sort of criminality. They're fighting with the police. And then we wonder why this stuff happens. So it's a mess. But I think it starts, the return is you got to have better leadership at the top. Police departments conducting social engineering experiments with all of this diversity, this training on implicit bias. It's all junk. It's all garbage. The mayor of Chicago, she's, oh my God, you guys can't get your mayor right. The last has been a disaster, for heaven's sake.
For about 100 years.
So, in the last count I had, because I watch, I'm only 72 miles away from you guys, and I get to Chicago from time to time. In 4 weekends, just weekends, Dan and Amy, in 4 weekends, 209 people shot, 47 dead in 4 weekends in Chicago. That is
atrocious,
beyond the pale.
Yeah.
That could happen in an American city, a great American city like Chicago. That's the problem. It's not the police.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's interesting, too, because the whole cut the police budgets by 50% and use that money to fund social welfare programs. Oh, I see. So we're going to cut the police budgets to pour more money onto the $30 trillion we've spent on Great Society programs since 1965 and have produced what results? even as the representation of Black Americans in office has increased exponentially during the 55 years. And yet the quality of life for so many Black residents and so many Black urban centers has actually declined during the time period where we have more Black representation in public office, and we have spent trillions upon trillions of dollars on the programs they said would alleviate poverty and inequalities.
And now they're suggesting spending more money. Money's the problem. All right, money's not the cure here. Money's the problem. Money created a dependency class, and you mentioned the 30 trillion since the 1960s war on poverty. Now, once again, and all these cities are talking about taking money from the police and giving it to social service programs. This is a joke. Joe Biden the other day suggested $300 million spending for child care and jobs training. We have done that to death. It's not going to work. They're working on the wrong things. They need a behavior change in the underclass. And they're afraid to look them in the eye and say, that's enough, no more. You guys need to clean up your act. Here's the way to get ahead. Raise your damn kids. Get an education. Become employed. Get a skill, some sort of trade, whatever. Go on and get degrees. Get into the mainstream here, and start to compete. We don't have, because the Democrats use these folks for votes, they don't want their lives to get better. Can't people see this?
Are there any of the reforms that are being bandied about, including by Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, that you would support? Some stuff to me seems fairly obvious. We have weaponized non-law enforcement agencies. I don't know why, education departments and other agencies have to have so much military equipment or law enforcement equipment when they're not law enforcement agencies. I don't like administrative agencies that get weaponized, for example. There's also discussions about SWAT teams in smaller communities. Are those really necessary? And then a bigger one and a more controversial one, amending or removing the qualified immunity that police officers have, or doing something, as Tim Scott had proposed, in that direction with certification and decertification of police.
All right, let me sort that out a little bit. In terms of some of these reforms, that's a big word now, police reform. You want to take some of the equipment away. If that's what people want to do in these communities, fine. They get to fund it, the taxpayers. We derive our authority from the consent of the government, fine. When you need the equipment, when you don't have it, and you have a barricaded subject, or you have a thing like I mentioned, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where you got some guy in there with 1,000 rounds, and he's mowing down kids like he's at a video arcade. That's when you need that stuff, okay? You hope you ever have to use it, but you always want it in reserve. So I just think that would be risky to do that. If you want to certify, not certify police, state by state, I'm okay with that. In Wisconsin, you have to be certified, so I'm familiar with that. Qualified immunity, I don't know what they're talking about, because you can sue a law enforcement officer in federal court anytime you want under 1983 claims, Section 1983. Here's why I think that's a smokescreen. They're throwing that out there. Let's try to do something and make it appear like we're reforming things here. When there's a lawsuit, if a law enforcement officer acts improperly, a tort lawyer will tell you this: we don't care about the police officer. For heaven's sakes, we want to sue the city and the police agency, because that's who has the deep pockets. We won't get anything out of a police officer. Most of those people don't have any wealth. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I don't understand. Nobody cares about, when you get into court, about holding the police officer to account in civil court, because they don't have anything. It's the city you want to sue. It's the police department you want to sue, because that's where you can make the big bucks. So we need to get off this qualified immunity. But again, everyone's got this on their lips now. Oh, yeah, qualified immunity, qualified immunity. Excuse me, they don't know what they're talking about. So policing has always been a local thing. All right, if we don't want to do certain things in certain communities, fine, but that should happen at the state level, the local level, not the federal level. You can't have. We already have, by the way, standardized rules for use of force. It's all codified in Supreme Court decisions on use of force. So, and every agency's held to that. So when people throw that out, I heard someone the other day said we need uniform standards on use of force. We already have it, for heaven's sakes, codified in the law.
He is Sheriff David Clarke, former Milwaukee County Sheriff, author of Cop Under Fire, Moving Beyond Hashtags of Race, Crime, and Politics for a Better America. Sheriff Clarke, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Be well.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm